win. You have hobbits.
We do.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah. The ring is over there somewhere, right? You just have to find it in the right hill or mountain or something like that.
I make no comment on that subject.
I have a good friend from Wellington, and I always ask him how things are in the Shire.
Technically, I'm closer.
Okay, I think we've got a good quorum. I'm super excited. I see everyone's really shy, but that's okay. We're so used to being on camera. I'm Jessica, and a leader of the Silicon Valley Marketo user group, and I also have Max.
Hey, y'all.
And today we have the Dallas, actually we have a lot of user group leaders on this call today, which always makes the conversations really, the one thing about COVID is that attendance of mugs across the world have gone up. And we get audience members from all over the world, which is so great. So welcome. And please, please utilize the chat. And if you have a question, John, did you do questions during the call? So one, if you have questions during the presentation today, please feel free to. I'll be monitoring the chat for John, for our speaker today, for John, and then via the chat, or if you just want to unmute yourself and talk. We're a friendly bunch here. For those of you who haven't come to a Silicon Valley user group. And if this is your first time to a Silicon Valley Marketo user group meeting, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. And if we have some time afterwards, after John's presentation, we'd love to see your lovely faces and to meet you all virtually, but I'd love to see you. Yeah, I think that's all I have for now. Okay, so just a couple of housekeeping things that we have. Okay, purple slide. Okay, so let's see, where's the, just because we've gone all virtual, thank you, Michael, for putting the slide together for all of the upcoming mugs. If you don't already know, you can go to mugs.marketo.com and all of the mugs are there. These are a listing of the mugs that are upcoming in October that you can go to. Like I said, there's people that have been going, there's some people that go to all of them. And also Michael and a group of people have been, Michael, who is the manufacturing mug leader, has been doing kind of a roundup monthly recap of all the mugs. So if you don't have the time, then someone else has done the work for you and recap the ones that have gone on, and we are recording them and posting them, right, Michael? You've got there's a YouTube channel now, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so it's just one YouTube spot. You can search Marketo virtual user groups, and it'll take you right in there. I've got a redirect if you want. I can give that to Jessica to make it easier.
Okay, we'll put the link out and we'll post it somewhere, and we'll get that out to everyone too as well. So lots of really cool topics that you can go to. There's probably a mug that you can go to like twice a week. And Summit. So the dates for Adobe Summit were announced for next year, and it is going to be virtual. So those are the dates. So and they're planning, another great virtual event. So those are all the announcements that I had today. So without further ado, we have John, who's going to be talking about some really, really cool things today that I'm super excited about. That basically, if there is something that you want to do that isn't out of the box Marketo, there's always probably a script for that. And so I'll go ahead and pass it on to you, John.
Thanks, Jess. And yeah, it often is the case that if there's not an out-of-the-box way to do it, and you can usually figure out even a creative way to approximate the functionality you're looking for. But if indeed you cannot quite get there with the out-of-the-box functionality, there's usually a way to make that happen. I'm going to share my screen here. And
John doesn't know we're going to play a game afterwards called Stump John. So if there is something, so after the presentation, if there's like some scenario that you have that you can think of, or something that you want to do out of Marketo that's not out of the box, at the end of the presentation, we can ask John and see if there's probably a script for that. How about that?
Oh boy, no pressure, huh? All right, so we're going to be talking about tapping into Marketo's JavaScript APIs today. First, by way of introduction, I'm John. I work at Digital Pie. I'm a Marketo consultant by day, superhero by night. No, not really. I have an agency and development background, been both on the creative side and on the dev side, and done a lot of work with deliverability. So been in the email space for quite a while. Goodness, Jess, I've been in marketing for 18 years. I feel old just saying that. Marketo consultant for about 5 of those. And as you mentioned, I am also a Dallas Mug co-leader. So it's good to have so many Mug leaders on the call. Interesting tidbit, I'm a 4th generation Alaskan. I like to tease my Texas neighbors and tell them I downsized to come to Texas. You know, Alaska's bigger, Texas is smaller. They don't like hearing that. But glad to be here with everybody. It's great to see such a great turnout. Happy to get started here. So first things first, let's talk about the Marketo Forms 2.0 API. This is very powerful, and of course, the form builder in Marketo is very flexible, but it doesn't always cover every use case. So that's where the Marketo Forms 2 API comes in. API, for those of you who may be new to that term, is an application programming interface. It's how applications talk to each other. And you can do that in many different languages, but we're going to be talking about JavaScript today, which of course is sort of the ubiquitous language of scripting on the web. Some of the use cases that we'll be talking about are the limitations of Marketo Forms. So for example, prefill options have been drastically reduced since last year when they were kind of limited to, they have to have a, click from an email and have the MKTO toke parameter in the URL and so forth. That's the only time prefill works currently out of the box. There's a script for that. Visibility rules based only on other fields, right? So you can only set the visibility rules for a field based on the values of other fields, not the value that you have in the database for that specific field. We'll talk about that one. Hopefully everybody on this call is doing implementing a global form strategy. It can be difficult to implement with native forms because it doesn't quite cover all the possible use cases. We'll get into that in a little bit. It's also not conducive to lead referrals. I don't know how many of you have ever tried doing that, but the native functionality for submitting somebody else into the database is tricky, to say the least. And all of these things can be overcome with the JavaScript API. There's a bit.ly link to that if you want to read more on the API documentation. There's a screenshot here. If you have the luxury of having a web developer to work with, this would be really helpful for them to get up to speed on the Forms API. And let's move on to Munchkin. It's really straightforward, right? It tracks web visits and clicks, but it's incredibly powerful because you can use that essentially to send data, any data, into Marketo. It works for both known and anonymous records. And yes, there is still a lot you can do with anonymous records in Marketo. Perhaps we can have some discussion or questions around that at the end. It also has an API. This is a separate JavaScript API that you can use to communicate with Marketo. And it's bi-directional communication too. We can get into that in a little bit. And then you can send additional user interaction via JavaScript into Marketo. It's not just about visits and clicks. You can represent other interactions on the website that you can detect and send that information into Marketo via the Munchkin API. Again, bit.ly link, documentation, developers love that, and it's helpful for getting them up to speed. So Jess, I think we'll just dive right into the first use case, and that is prefill. There was kind of an uproar. Some people really miss having that prefill available, and it's possible to bring that back. So can my forms prefill like they used to? Yes, they can. You can pass token data from a Marketo landing page into JavaScript, and then from that JavaScript, you can pass it into the form fields. So on the Marketo landing pages, you can use just tokens and JavaScript. You don't need to host any files anywhere or anything. It's right there embedded in the page. But just remember, keep in mind that even if you do this, the reason prefill is kind of taken away or at least dialed back is that it exposes PII, right? First name, last name, email, all that kind of stuff. You want to be careful not to expose that information to just anybody who happens to be using a computer where somebody else potentially is cookied. So keep that in mind, be careful, protect yourself, but at the same time, it can be pretty useful to re-enable prefill. There's an advanced option that works even for embedded forms. So this solution doesn't work only for Marketo landing pages, but you can also use that for forms embedded on your website. I'm sure nobody on this call knows the name Sanford, right? No, everybody knows the name Sanford. Sandy has contributed a lot to the Marketo community, and he's made available essentially a Marketo data layer that you can then pick up on all of those fields. Any field in the Marketo database on a cookied record, you can take that data and populate it into fields on an embedded Marketo form on your website. And there's a link here for that, bit.ly/Sanford Prefill. That'll take you directly to a blog post that explains that. And again, if you have a developer, they'll be able to follow along. Other use cases for this, incidentally, you can use that same methodology to expose a Marketo data layer. And some use cases for that would be web personalization. So you can customize the website based on the data you have in your Marketo instance. Of course, you can prefill non-Marketo forms as well as Marketo forms. It's just a data layer. You can push the data anywhere you want. So if you have Gravity forms or some other form system on your website, you can prefill those forms from your Marketo data. Pretty cool. And then if you use Google Analytics or maybe another analytics package, you can send the Marketo ID as a foreign key from your Marketo instance into that analytics package and then use your BI tool to marry the two data sets together, analytics plus Marketo. Oh, and there's screenshots. That's kind of what the code looks like in a nutshell. You populate a token into some code, and then you use that variable to populate the form. Any questions there? All right. Another question I get, Jess, is can I hide the opt-in checkbox if I already have consent, right? If you've already asked for somebody for permission from someone to market to them, right? And they've already opted in, well, you don't want to keep asking them and give them the opportunity to opt out every single time they see a form, right? So you can do that. You can hide that checkbox if you already have consent, and you can add additional layers of complexity or logic on there as well. So again, you pass the token data in JavaScript. You can evaluate the consent value that you have in your Marketo instance already. And if it's true, then you just simply hide the checkbox row. JavaScript makes it very simple to hide a checkbox row. You got to be careful not to make it required, otherwise you can't submit the form. Otherwise, if you do not have a consent value, you can show the checkbox row and use optional validation. Again, one of the endpoints in the JavaScript API for forms specifically is on validate, and you can pass in any custom functionality you want there to make that field required, for example, if it's shown. And then further, if you want to make that even more sophisticated, for example, if you only want the checkbox to show if you don't have consent, or if you don't have consent for the country chosen that is also within this list of GDPR countries, for example, you can do that as well. And there's different ways of approaching that, but you can have much more complex logic in there. So you could take something like lead opted in, pass that into your script, lead country, pass that into your script, and then perform logic based on that so that it'll show or hide that checkbox, depending on what that logic says.
The other use case too, John, that I see, I get a lot of requests for is, you know, sometimes I can show the checkbox checked, sometimes I can't show it unchecked. So that JavaScript can be pretty handy to do all that kind of form, the country logic right there.
Yep. Oh, I do have, occasionally people ask, you know, can we look up the country by IP address and, you know, hide the checkbox field depending on what country comes back from your IP address? The short answer is yes, you can, but you have to be really careful with that. A lot of times you get a false positive or false negative, I'm not sure which it is, but you get the wrong country back because sometimes the headquarters are in a different country than where the person physically is sitting. And if they're on their corporate VPN, sometimes it shows up with the wrong country. So you have to be really careful with that. You can inadvertently be out of compliance even when you're trying to do the right thing. Okay. Moving on. We talked about a global form strategy, and I hope everyone on this call knows the value of executing a global form strategy in their Marketo instance. Just a quick poll maybe. How many of you have more than, say, 10 forms in your Marketo instance? Nobody? Okay. It ends up being most people. And I've asked this question, how many have 25? How many have 50? How many have 100, 200, 500? And I've seen as many as 650, I think, forms somewhere in there in a single Marketo instance. Thanks, Warren. Yeah, it's very difficult to manage that many forms. So a global form strategy basically simplifies your forms down to a preset list of prescribed forms. Use this one in that scenario, use that one in this other scenario, and you have a set of just, I don't know, maybe a handful of forms, hopefully as few as 5 or 10 maybe, depending on your setup. 18, 15, depending on the company, that can be a really good number. One of the challenges that I've seen, and one of the reasons that number of forms grows sometimes by multiples, is this idea that you can only specify the button text and the redirect URL in Marketo. And that's not true. So think about this. You have a gated asset form and you want to put that on your website. You embed it on your website. The button text says, just by default, submit, but you want it to say, download now for white papers and ebooks, and register now or watch now for on-demand webinars, right? Typically, you'd have to have 2 different forms in Marketo for that. It's possible, and yes, there's a script for that. You can change the button text and even the redirect URL that happens, where you're redirected to after you submit the form, on a per form or per page basis. So you can actually execute on that promise of a global form strategy, which is why we're talking about it. Landing pages can use tokens, so you can customize your forms that way for landing pages. But on the website, you can use a Google Sheet. This is pretty cool. You can put a list of all of your URLs in a Google Sheet, and essentially you publish that as JSON, which is a structured data format. You can parse all that data in JavaScript from the Google Sheet and essentially do a VLOOKUP. So if you say, does this current page that I'm on match any of the entries in this Google Sheet? And if it does, if it finds a match, it takes the rest of the data from that row and uses it to override values on the form. Let's take a look at what that looks like. Here's an example. So if you do a VLOOKUP on this column, column A, and you say, okay, we're on the Gartner white paper resources page, then I want the download now text to show up as the button text. And when that form is submitted, I want to take the follow-up URL from here, and that's where I want to redirect to. But if I'm on the GDPR webinar page, I want that same form, again, it's the same form, to show watch now, and follow-up would be to the thank you page for the GDPR webinar. So if you're on contact, that's what it looks like. And if you're on the GDPR webinar page, it would look like this: watch now and submit.
You see, so there's a question. There's a couple of questions in the chat, John.
Okay.
It's called the Stump John. No. So the first one is Warren's asking about could you personalize the button? Like, could you actually pull in the token of the person and say, watch now, John?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you could. I mean, it's kind of creepy, but yeah, you can.
I don't know, Warren. You could do that. See, I told you, John's got a solution for that. And the next question is for languages. This is a good one. Languages, branding, like do I need to have a form for French, for German, for English, or is there a way to actually do a global form but have the language, change?
Yep. You can definitely swap out the languages in real time. You can use JavaScript to do that. I've even worked with clients to integrate their form translation data into Sitecore or WordPress, so it's directly implemented in their CMS, and their marketing team is actually empowered to go in and change their form translations on the website CMS, and then that data feeds into the JavaScript that then translates their forms on the fly, depending on the language setting for the website. Pretty cool.
So the answer is yes, there's a script for that.
Yep. I was working with one client, Jess. I think they have websites, or their website is translated into 51 different languages, and they built it into their Sitecore instance, a module where you could translate the forms, and they deployed one form. Imagine that, one form across everything, everywhere, and all of that translation data from Sitecore overrode the form's native settings, which were English, of course. And they actually have forms in 51 languages, and it's just one form in Marketo. Pretty cool. Good question.
Are you going to talk about hidden fields, or is that on a different slide?
Hidden fields. I don't think we have that called out specifically, but we can talk about hidden fields if you like.
So since y'all are we have a quiet bunch today. I don't know. How many of you had to put like a lot of hidden fields on a form? And if you have even 5 forms versus our 100 forms, manually going in and putting in, especially for the data appending vendors, you have to go in and like, oh, we have to select all those different hidden fields and add them to each one. And so I was doing that for a while until John told me that there was a better way with a script, nonetheless.
Yeah, that's a pretty common use case. I see that for smart forms from LeadSpace. You have to add a bunch of fields. I think as many as 120 fields for some clients. And that's a pain to drag all those in and manually update all those forms, especially if you have multiple forms. So there's a script for that. You just add the hidden fields via the form or via the script, and all your forms anywhere, everywhere are updated exactly the same way, have exactly the same set of fields. I think demand base is probably the other one where I see that pretty commonly. Google reCAPTCHA is another one where you can add in a hidden field, and that helps with bot, validation and whatnot. So there's a lot of use cases for that. But yeah, short answer is yes, you can add hidden fields at scale.
And when would you, I know sometimes we put some of that stuff in Google Tag Manager. I mean, when would you put that in Google Tag Manager, pros and cons versus, how you would deploy it like on the landing page?
Yeah, Google Tag Manager or any other tag manager, Adobe has one. There's, Telium or Segment. There's a bunch of different ways to deploy JavaScript globally across all of your web properties, but that's really the benefit of it. If you want to update all of your forms everywhere, regardless of whether they're on a Marketo landing page or your WordPress website, or heaven forbid your Unbounce or lead pages or something like that, you can do that all from one spot if you're using a single Google Tag Manager container or similar tag manager. It's nice to deploy things once and have it affect everything.
I knew Warren was going to come. Warren, you see Warren's question about, are there any useful scripts to help with social or benefit the social strategy? And the first thing that comes to mind is UTMs, because you are the UTM god. Or do you, I don't know if you have any other slides on UTMs, or, I'm always talking to you about UTMs.
Yeah. Since we're talking about UTMs, I'll just skip forward to that slide. There's a script for tracking UTM. So obviously the purpose of a UTM parameter or a UTM query string is understanding what drove the traffic to this page on my tracked web property, my owned web property. That would be probably the closest thing to what you're looking for here. There is a script for that, Warren. This is the script. So if you download if you click on this link or you go to this bit.ly page, it will take you to a form where you can configure this script for your Marketo instance. Basically, you input the SOAP API names, don't use REST, use the SOAP API names, put them into the form, click download, it'll send you an email, and you click the link in the email to download your configured version of the script. So it's ready to go.
So bonus present for everybody.
Yeah.
And this one, this UTM tracker, this is the cooking, the tracking, the UTMs, right? This is the one where, so for example, you spend a ton of money on LinkedIn campaigns, and they click on it and they go to your page, but they don't fill it out, and then they close the browser, and they, you don't, basically that money spent. But 2 months later, they come back and they download something else on your site. If your UTMs weren't cookied, then your hard, money on LinkedIn wouldn't get credit. But if you are getting those UTMs cookied, your paid efforts could get back to attributed, to those campaigns, even if they don't take the action immediately. Yes. Right. So yes, we are going to we'll send the slides out, and also the recording, so that in case anyone missed it, you guys can have it.
Okay. I think we were here, Jess. Should we get back to our regularly scheduled programming?
Yes.
Okay. This is a fun one. I get this occasionally. Can I see when people watch YouTube videos on our website or on our landing pages? And the short answer is yes. As long as they're embedded, they're not on youtube.com. Obviously, I can't deploy a script on youtube.com. That would be quite the feat. So just like Marketo provides JavaScript APIs, the YouTube player, when if you go on youtube.com, you look at a video and it has the share options underneath, you click share and you get the little embed code, right? You take that embed code and you put it on your website. That embed code can be available as a JavaScript API. So you can tap into that JavaScript API for the YouTube video, as well as the Munchkin API, and you can essentially tie the two together. You make them talk to each other. Remember, it's an application programming interface. So if you take this programming interface and this programming interface and you get them to talk to each other, you can suddenly get YouTube information into Marketo. Essentially, you're forwarding those events. The YouTube video is broadcasting, hey, I'm at 21% or I'm at 27% of this video. And you can take that information and essentially push it into Marketo to capture milestones like 25, 50, 75, or you can capture the completion of the video. If they watched all the way to the end, you can capture that event over on the Marketo side. And then of course, in Marketo, you can use that clicked link on web page event, which is how that data gets into Marketo. And you can use that to trigger scoring. You could trigger program membership, or even put them into a nurture campaign that will continue nurturing that relationship. And what that actually looks like in Marketo is this. This is a click link event, and all of the query parameters have that data about the video. So here's the video ID. Here's the action that was achieved. They achieved a milestone, and you can see the percentage as well as the time code of that event.
Hey, John, does the same concept apply to other video hosting vendors like Vimeo?
It does. I don't have a canned script ready for Vimeo or Wistia or any of the others, but a lot of them do provide the same type of JavaScript API. So you could take this idea and port it over into a different solution.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And if you're on a shoestring budget, like I was when I was last running marketing, sometimes, YouTube's the way to go.
There's a question in the chat. Can you find out where the person pauses or drops off?
You can see pauses. There's not an event that fires to say, they left the page or something like that. Although I think you could do that. I've never had that question, but I think you can do that. If they browse, if they bounce off the page or close the page, you could fire an event right before they're allowed to do that, and it sends that information into Marketo.
Just another script, right, John?
It's another script. All right. Good questions. Keep them coming. Misha, I'm glad the script is working well for you.
We haven't stumped John yet. These questions aren't hard enough, guys.
All right. Moving on. Can people register a guest for a webinar or event? This is a fun one. You can do that. So somebody fills out the form to register for an event, and you can include a little button here that says, I would like to bring a guest. And that button for this particular client, you might recognize the color scheme. It basically clones all of the registrant fields on the form to guest fields. And you can, the person who's filling out the form will have to submit all of those fields. They all become required via JavaScript. And when they submit that form, essentially what's happening is the original form fields that were on the form get submitted just like they were. Standard functionality, no change. The one change that the script does make for the standard functionality is that it appends person notes or comment capture notes that say, this person referred this other person, and you put the guest information into the record that is being submitted into Marketo. Then once that form submission comes back and Marketo confirms receipt, you can say, on the success of that form submission, then I want to submit another hidden form submission with all of the guest information. So it submits all the guest info, guest first name, guest last name, guest email, guest company name, and it submits that into your Marketo instance as a net new record. And it decouples it from the cookie, right? You have the Munchkin cookie for the person who filled out the form. You don't want to interrupt that. You want to continue tracking their web behavior without associating that cookie with the guest's cookie, right? You don't want the guest to be cookie because you don't know who that is yet. So it submits into your Marketo instance the guest information, and in their person notes then it says, this person was referred by so-and-so, right? The person who actually filled out the form. It includes all of their information, first name, last name, email, in the person notes on the referred record. And you could even use that in sourcing or whatever to say, this person was a referral. That's actually their lead source. And you could stamp their lead source as referral. You can even put the person's name in there that referred them. Pretty cool. I see a lot of chat stuff going on here. Anything we need to address?
Documentation and a script you can run to pass us all these scripts.
Bourne.
Maybe sign up. I like that.
That would be cool. I don't know. I've never tried hacking Bevy. That'd be kind of fun.
Looks like it might be pretty easy based on the interface.
Yeah, no comment. My kids polluted my Netflix account, and my weekend project a couple weekends ago was writing a script to like unlike all the, I can't remember, all the kids shows and stuff, so that it actually generated real recommendations for me. That was kind of fun. You can hack anything. Documentation on referral programs. I don't think I have any documentation on referral programs. That's a good question, though. I guess boy, I don't know, Jess. How would you do that in terms of like acquisition program and sourcing and stuff? Would you set up an operational program called referral or refer?
Oh no. I think Caitlin's asking. Are you saying like, do you have any documentation of how you could do this in your instance? Is that what you're asking? Yeah, she wants, like, they want to be cool like you, John.
There's the short answer is no. I don't have any like ready.
It's all in John's head. That's the problem. It's all in. Well, originally this was originally this talk was supposed to be at Summit, right? And I know that we had put together some things for people like a virtual goodie bag. We can make sure that we send that out to everybody after post
and
event.
Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Hit me up there, johnbourne.com. That'll redirect. What is the most interesting fun script you've run? Fun script. I don't know how fun it was, but it was interesting. I actually wrote an investment calculator with my kids and talked about the value of compound interest, and they got pretty excited about that. And they have a lot of years for that to compound. So that was fun getting them excited about investing.
I like your Netflix script.
Netflix is fun too. Yeah. Internally, I write scripts for like our billing system. If it doesn't display the little hours and stuff the way I want it to, you can basically scrape the page and take all that data and mash it up. Basically run pivot tables in the browser, and it happens automatically. That's kind of fun.
Okay, your idea of fun is not my idea of fun. Just saying.
To each his own, or her own. Okay, shall we continue? Jess, this is a fun one. I know you are very opinionated about what is the right way to do this.
Well, if you've come to my talks over the years, I get very passionate about, filling acquisition program and getting that right. And I always give prizes for people who have the highest empty acquisition program. So this is near and dear to my heart.
Yeah. And very closely tied to that is the structure for setting up, for understanding content engagement or content metrics, right? So there's this interesting functionality. It's usually a good thing where Marketo landing pages, if they're local to a program, right? If they're within a program, then any form fills on that form or on that landing page automatically accrue acquisition credit to the program in which they reside, right? So that program becomes the acquisition program automatically, even if you don't have the flow step. In the case of content programs, where you have a program that represents a piece of content that somebody can engage with, right? Gated content usually. You don't want that content program to get acquisition credit because it skews your numbers, right? It's double dipping. Jess, you probably can explain that better, but it throws off your first touch attribution.
So like a good example would be like a webinar, and you paid like tens of thousands of dollars on LinkedIn. You don't want the webinar to get credit, because I want my LinkedIn program to get credit, right? So if you don't, like normally I do like this fancy acrobatic thing to make sure my LinkedIn programs will get credit when they fill out, the webinar. But I mean, I think John, you literally told me about this last week, and I'm like, where have you been my whole life?
So the short version of this is basically a script goes in and nulls out the LPID field. It's right here. That is how Marketo makes that connection. So if you null that out on submit, you basically intercept the form submission just before it's actually submitted into Marketo. It's between the time when somebody clicks the submit button and the data is actually sent to Marketo. Right in between there, you inject a null value into that LPID field, and it cancels out that acquisition. Now, you only want to apply that to content programs because normally that's the functionality you actually do want, right? You want that program to get acquisition credit. But I would contend that your process should be the same across every program, and you should have that as a flow step anyway. Check to see whether the program or whether the person who's flowing through that smart campaign has an acquisition program. If they do not, then assign the acquisition program in the flow. It's a little clearer that way. Oh, and there's some screenshots. Any thoughts or questions there? Okay. Cool. And we talked about the UTM tracking script already. Let's see, what else do you guys want to know? Is there anything in the chat that we need to address?
Does anyone else have any like any situations in Marketo that, that is either manual or functionality that isn't out of the box that you're wondering if there's a method for it?
Okay, so we have some questions. Any scripts you can run for blocking competitors? And Warren, I presume you mean on forms, is that right? So they can't fill out a form. We've definitely done that before. You have to have a list of competitors, obviously. And if you can feed that into JavaScript in a way that it can look at, for example, email domains, you can compare, okay, is the email address that was entered on the form in this list of competitor email domains? And if it is, then you can just block that form submission. You can even show them an error that says, I don't know what you'd want to show them. Maybe you just hide the form. Maybe you just redirect them to their own site.
I remember seeing some instances, someone's instance like that, where it either goes to a blank page or it redirects them somewhere else.
Yeah,
no
sorry,
matter what form they fill.
I've seen a similar use case too, where a company had, they were conducting partner webinars, and it's kind of the same idea, right? Compare the email address that's entered to a list of known domains. And they only wanted partners to be able to register for a webinar, because it's a partner webinar, right? They don't want prospects in there. They don't want any consumers in there, just partners. The big caveat was that they had a partner network of over 25,000 people or 25,000 companies. And they wanted to limit the registrations for that partner webinar to only that list of 25,000 domains. So that was another use case where that list was published in a Google Sheet. That Google Sheet was made available to JavaScript via JSON. And when the person put in an email address, it compared their email domain to the list of partner domains. If they did not show up on the list, then it would say, sorry, this webinar is only for partners. And it would hide the form.
Well, there's two really good questions in here. One about, are there any scripts to run to block bots with form fills?
Yeah, there's a number of approaches. That's a great question. Google reCAPTCHA is really, really good. Obviously, Google has a lot of AI and stuff they can apply to it. Essentially, they apply a score. So you integrate Google reCAPTCHA into your forms, and it doesn't require the little pop-up, click all the buses or street signs or crosswalks or whatever. It's completely invisible to the user, with the exception of this form uses Google reCAPTCHA credit at the bottom. And it applies a score based on tons of different algorithms and ways that Google has of detecting whether it's a bot or a real person, including time on page and the user interaction on the page, mouse movement, all that kind of stuff. With that, you get a score in a hidden field that is from, I believe it's 0 to 1, and it tells you how likely that record is that's coming in through the form is to be a bot or a real person. And from that, you can make a determination. Basically, once the record comes into Marketo, you fire a webhook to go out to reCAPTCHA, and reCAPTCHA responds back with a validation message, so you understand whether that should be suspect or not. And from that point, then you can have an operational campaign that flags them as a quarantined record. In most instances, we'll have a static list that's for quarantined records. And if they're a member of that list, it prevents them from entering the life cycle. It prevents them from scoring. It prevents them from a whole slew of other operational processes. So that if there's a bot attack, 10,000 records can all be quarantined programmatically, and then a real person can go in there and review those. If they're bots, delete them. If they're not, you just remove them from that static list, and that removal also triggers all the operational processes that were postponed or paused to restart. So then they enter the life cycle, they can MQL, they can score, they can do all that stuff. And it's done after the fact, right? So if you get false positive, you're still safe. And if you get false negatives, then they make it through. That makes sense? Okay.
I'll come back. There's one on like, can you block ESP email addresses? Yeah, that's like from Bourne Fields, like Gmail, Yahoo. Yeah, that's
a very similar use case to, block competitors or only allow partner domains or something like that. Basically, you can use the email domain either to whitelist or blacklist somebody. So whatever use case within that scenario, it's the same pattern either way.
What about normalizing company names?
That one, I mean, you can apply a specific business rule, like always use proper case. But given the way companies capitalize their names, right? Lean Data would have a lowercase d, and that's not the way they prefer their brand to look. Whereas Lead Space would be correct, right? It depends on, I guess, how you'd want to do that. It wouldn't be 100%.
I think if you had a database, so that's not John's fault, Bourne. I think if you had like a master Google spreadsheet of every possibility, then you can do it. But I think I don't think John's writing AI scripts yet, right?
Or
No, but could you do a lookup based on what they're going to type it in? Because there's other companies that deploy a form script on the back end that does a lookup to see what the company name is likely to be. So if I was going to type IBM, it would then populate that outright. So if you have a company names kind of tidy in your Marketo database, could you do something that looked up the company name that's already standardized in your database?
yes, yeah, it's a really good idea. Yeah, you'd have to publish that list in a way that it was publicly accessible so that JavaScript can retrieve the list, and then I would probably match on company domain, because that's either correct or not, right? Somebody types at ibm.com, they're at IBM, and you can use that as a lookup to find the company name and populate it.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Oh, this is a good one. Any best practices around using Marketo landing pages versus the website, CMS, and navigating around politics of SEO? When to use what?
Use what? It's a good question. I like to see Marketo landing pages used for event registrations or something that's kind of transient in nature, right? It's for a limited time period. And once that's over, it goes away and becomes, if it's a webinar, it becomes content after that, right? The on-demand webinar becomes a piece of content, a video that you can then add to your resources library, at which point it becomes part of your website. So for pretty much everything else, maybe your unsubscribe page is still a landing page, maybe your live events, your trade shows, anything that's transient in nature would make sense as a Marketo landing page. But other than that, it would make sense probably more as a page on your website, depending, of course, on what your relationship with your IT team is like, right?
Waitlisting if over the sign up limit. Yes.
Yeah. That's one Sanford's written extensively about. There's no need for me to really go into it, but yeah, essentially you put a counter and you know how many people have registered for it, and it disables registrations when that's reached. Yeah, that's a really good use case.
Yeah, so once that limit is reached, it automatically shows like a different page to show that it's full.
Or if you don't want to redirect to a different page and not maintain two different landing pages, you can just hide the form and show it, sorry, we're full message. Cool, good questions.
Well, awesome. Anything else related to what John presented, or for a script, or just anything really? Or Or if there is a topic that you are particularly interested in for the next topics that we would like us to find speakers for the next Marketo user group meeting. Program level fields. Well, that's an interesting one. You know, I haven't played around with that yet. John, have you?
I have. I have a whole write-up on it. I've been meaning to publish it to our blog. We're actually redoing our website right now, so I'm holding off until we're on the new website for precisely the reason that was brought up in the last question, SEO and whatnot. But yeah, program member custom fields open up an interesting opportunity. So far, they're not really accessible. The form has to be local to the program, and that kind of kills a lot of the functionality that we're talking about. So yeah, end up using a lot more local forms because of PMCF fields. So hopefully that is extended, that we can use those more broadly, but until they are not required, until and unless they are not required to be local to the program, it limits their effectiveness for purposes like we've been talking about here.
Wasn't there something, I can't remember, like I remember having a conversation where like you were able to push data into a field that actually didn't exist, or am I remembering that wrong? Like you were able to push in data and you didn't have to, it wasn't an actual field, but like, I forget what the whole story was, but like it was like a way to, it was before program level fields existed. It was a way to like,
Yeah.
Does this ring a bell?
I don't know if there's an official term for that. I call them pseudo fields. They don't really exist in your Marketo instance, but if you go to this bit.ly URL, this is a good example of that. These UTM fields do not actually exist in the Marketo instance. This is a Marketo form, but these fields don't exist there. Essentially, you just put all the HTML for those fields on the Marketo form, and you use JavaScript to take all of that data, concatenate it together in a way that makes sense for whatever your application is, and then you push it into a real Marketo form. So you take input from all 8 of these fields and you concatenate them together. And that's where, in this particular instance, there's a query string in this link. So if you fill out the form, you get a link with a query string that has all the parameters that you put in on the form itself, but none of those fields are actually mapped into fields in Marketo. Instead, the script takes the medium, the source, the campaign, the content, et cetera, and it lumps them all together into a single query string. And that whole query string has been written into a custom field that does exist. So 1 field instead of 8.
So we could, I mean, so if we take that use case, instead of using the program level fields, we could take the same philosophy and actually not use the Marketo feature to do it, but accomplish the same thing, right? So I can still use my global form. On there would be some pseudo fields about, do I want chicken or fish, right? And then the field would look like it while I'm filling out the form. But then on the back end, I can push like all of those custom things into a different field that then I can parse through. Like I can then look for, hey, does the field contain chicken? Then add it to the static list, etc. So I could get around the fact that program level fields are only allowed 20, and it requires a local form. So that kind of just kills my mojo in Marketo. And instead, we can use these pseudo fields and just accomplish the same thing. Does that mean program level? Well, I don't, has anyone else that's still on the call, has anyone else used program level fields?
Hey, Jessica, this is Denise. I did recently for the first time, and I had the same issue that you did. It was the one case where I thought, because I always have put forms in Design Studio, and that was an exception I made in order to make use of the program fields and the program level fields, and that was kind of disappointing.
Right. So I guess in short, yes, Warren, we don't need the program level fields if you can, make pseudo fields.
But you'd still have to have, if I understood that conversation right, if you use the pseudo fields, you still need a real field to put this data from the pseudo fields in. And in that case, you're going to have the same issue that the program level fields are there to solve, which is you'd have to have a real field that says chicken or fish, and it's not tied to that, just to that program.
So, I mean, I like to have like a set of temporary fields so that I can just like check out from the library, you know, like maybe 10 temporary fields that I can just clear out. But the nice thing is if I need like 5 custom fields for a particular program, I don't need to check out 5 custom temporary fields. I can concatenate and mush all the data and just stick it in a field, use it, and then dump the data.
Yeah, that's true. The other limitation that I found that was frustrating about those program level fields is in the flow step. If you want to say, if they answered the program level field this way, send them that, send them this email. But if they answered the program level field, which is a question, in another way, send them a different email. In this case, it was sending emails, and you can't do that. All you can say in the flow step choices is the program level field, I forget the terminology, but there was a data value change in a program level field, in that program level field.
So you can't use add choice.
You can use add choice, but all you can say is the field value changed, but you don't know what it changed to. Like if it's a yes, no question and you wanted to say, and you ask them, was your appointment scheduled yet? And they answered yes or no. All you can do in the flow step is to say they answered the question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it looks like Glenn is saying that, then you reference member of smart list. And
right.
You kind of get around it, which is,
right.
I mean, just kind of clunky. The
right.
just kind of clunky, and I'd rather.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, this is what agreed. There's a workaround. I just was disappointed that, as you say, it's clunky.
One other thing you can do with the data that's entered into these pseudo fields is either you can submit a Munchkin event separate from the form submission. So you could fire a visit web page or click link event, and you can pass in the data from that field as the query string. And then you can take that in a trigger campaign, you can take that and write it into a custom field or a temporary field, or you could use that trigger campaign to add them to a static list. Static lists can kind of operate as a Boolean field in lieu of a Boolean field, right? These people chose fish, these people chose chicken, these wanted the veggie option, whatever.
Cool. All right. Max, anything you want to add before we wrap up?
No, I think this is super helpful. I think we'll send this deck out. So keep an eye out for an email from us with this and the recording following this.
Thank you, everyone. You'll feel free to connect with John on LinkedIn or myself or Max. We're always here. If there are other topic ideas that you guys want to have for the next one, format ideas, we're open to that. Thank you guys so much for coming, and we will see you guys next time.
Yes.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.